Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving deep into a topic that is absolutely fundamental to, well, everything around us, really. We're talking real property. We've got a significant stack of source material here, taking us through the core concepts of how land is owned, used, and transferred.
Real property law can definitely sound intimidating. Phrases like fee simple or rule against perpetuities might make your eyes glaze over. But understanding these basics is incredibly important. Whether you own a home, rent an apartment, or are just curious about the legal framework that governs the physical world. Well, these concepts underpin so many aspects of daily life and commerce.
Exactly. Our mission today is to act as your guides through these sources, cutting through the jargon to extract the crucial nuggets of knowledge. We'll explore the different ways you can actually own land, the rights and responsibilities that come with that ownership, the intricate dance of land sales contracts, the vital role of mortgages as security, the dynamics between landlords and tenants, and how the system figures out who truly owns what when there are competing claims. It's a lot, but by the end, you'll have a much clearer picture of the legal landscape beneath your feet.
We'll focus on highlighting the key distinctions, the underlying principles, and the practical implications of these rules as presented in the material.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're starting with the very foundation. The different ways you can legally hold title to land right now. These are known as present estates.
Right, present means you have the current right to possess the property. Our source material begins with the most complete form of private ownership, the one that's usually the default, the fee simple absolute.
Absolute. Sounds like total control.
Essentially, yes. A fee simple absolute represents the greatest possible aggregation of rights in land. It has potentially infinite duration. The key language you look for, although in modern law simpler terms suffice, is traditionally to A, or to A and his heirs. While "and his heirs" used to be necessary to create a fee simple, today it merely describes the type of estate, one that can be inherited, not a condition for the heirs to take. To A alone is presumed to grant a fee simple absolute because the law favors the largest possible estate.
Got it. So if a deed just says, I convey Blackacre to my daughter, she gets a fee simple absolute unless it specifically says otherwise.
Exactly. And what makes it absolute and so powerful is its flexibility. It's freely alienable. You can sell, gift, or transfer it during your lifetime without restriction. Well, with limited exceptions. It's divisible. You can pass it by will when you die. And it's descendable. If you die without a will, it passes to your legal heirs according to the state's laws of intestate succession. There is no future interest in this property held by any third party or the grantor. You own it completely.
The source points out that simply stating a desire or hope, like to my son, hoping he never sells it, isn't enough to limit that fee simple absolute. That's called precatory language.
Precisely. To create something less than a fee simple absolute, the grantor must use clear operative legal language that explicitly limits the duration or adds a condition.
Yeah.
Precatory language expresses a wish, not a legal command that alters the estate granted.
Which leads us to the estates that do have limitations. The defeasible fees. These are also potentially infinite, but they can be defeated or terminated if a specific event occurs.
Yes, they are like a fee simple, but with a legal string attached. The source breaks these down into three types. And paying close attention to the exact language used in the grant is crucial for telling them apart, as the consequences of the event differ.
First up, the fee simple determinable.
For this one, look for language that denotes duration, so long as while, during, or until. The defining feature of a fee simple determinable is that upon the occurrence of the stated event, the property automatically reverts back to the original grantor. No action is needed by the grantor. Ownership shifts instantly.
Automatic. So if the grant is to my town so long as it is used as a library and the town stops using it as a library, it automatically goes back to the original grantor or their heirs.
That's right. The moment the condition is broken, the original grantor or their successor holds the present estate. The future interest retained by the grantor following a fee simple determinable is called a possibility of reverter.
Okay, automatic return with a possibility of reverter. How is that different from the next type, the fee simple subject to condition subsequent?
The language is different, signaling a different effect. Here, you look for conditional language like but if, provided that, unconditioned that, or unless. When the stated condition occurs, the property does not automatically revert. Instead, the original grantor has the right or option to terminate the estate and retake possession. The grantor must take some affirmative action to exercise this right, usually by filing a lawsuit for re-entry or possession.
Ah, so it's not automatic. The grantor has a choice. If the grant is to my town, providing that it is used as a library, and they stop using it as a library, the town still owns it until the original grantor decides to reclaim it and takes legal steps to do so.
Exactly. The future interest retained by the grantor in this case is called a right of reentry. Some people call it a power of termination. On law school exams, and importantly in practice if the you isn't perfectly clear, courts often lean towards interpreting ambiguous language as creating a fee simple subject to conditions subsequent, because forfeiture's land is harsh, you know. And this type gives the current owner a chance before the original grantor acts.
So, fee simple determinable, durational language, automatic, possibility of reverter, versus fee simple subject to condition of subsequent, conditional language, option, right of reentry.
You got.
What's the third defeasible fee?
That's the fee simple subject to executory interest. Here, when the limiting event or condition occurs, the property doesn't go back to the original grantor. Instead, it automatically transfers to a third party named in the grant. The future interest held by that third party is called an executory interest.
So the flow is grantor to grantee 1, and then upon the condition, it goes from grantee 1 to grantee 2, the third party.
Precisely. The source uses examples like, to my daughter until she marries, then to my son, or to my daughter, but if she marries, then to my son. In both cases, if the daughter marries, the property automatically shifts to the son. The son holds an executory interest.
This sounds like it overlaps with future interest we'll talk about later.
It does. An executory interest is a type of future interest. When a defeasible fee goes to a third party, that third party has an executory interest. The source helps identify these by noting that if you see a grant involving 3 parties from the start grantor, plus 2 grantees who might take consecutively honest, it often involves a shifting executory interest. That's where the interest shifts from one grantee to another upon a condition.
Okay.
There's also a springing executory interest, where the interest goes from the grantor to a grantee after a gap in time or upon a condition, which might temporarily leave a present interest with the grantor. An example could be to A for life and 1 year after A's death to B. That creates a springing executory interest in B that will spring from the grantor's estate 1 year after A's death.
Got it. So defeasible fees have that trigger event, and the distinction is who gets it when the trigger pulls back to the grantor automatically, FSD,
Right.
back to the grantor if they choose FSSCS, or to a third party automatically, FSSEI.
Exactly. That covers the potentially infinite estates. Now let's look at estates whose duration is explicitly limited by a person's lifespan, the life estate.
This one seems more intuitive. You own it for someone's life.
Yes. A life estate grants the right to possess and use the property for the duration of a specific individual's life, known as the measuring life. This could be the life of the person holding the life estate, like to A for life, or it could be the life of someone else. That second one, to B for the life of C, is known as a life estate pour autre vie, for the life of another.
And it ends automatically when the measuring life ends.
Correct. The person who holds the life estate, the life tenant, has the right to possess the property, to use it, and to collect rents or other income generated by it.
Can they sell or mortgage their interest?
They absolutely can. The life tenant can sell, give away, or mortgage their interest. However, and this is key, they can only transfer the interest they possess. So if A has a life estate for A's life, and A sells it to B, B receives an interest that lasts only as long as A is alive. When A dies, B's interest ends, regardless of whether B is still living. This limitation, obviously, significantly impacts the market value of a life estate.
That makes sense. You can't sell something you don't have. You can't sell a fee simple if you only have a life estate. What about the life tenant's responsibilities to whoever gets the property after they die?
They have significant obligations to the holder of the future interest, often called the remainder man or reversioner. The source details these. A life tenant must pay ordinary expenses like property taxes and interest on any pre-existing mortgage, at least to the extent they are receiving income or other financial benefit from the property. They also have a duty to make reasonable repairs to the property, provided they have sufficient income for the property to do so.
And this brings us back to the doctrine of waste. It applies here too.
Yes, it's a critical doctrine, balancing the present owner's rights with the future owner's expectations. It prevents the present possessor from damaging the property or using it in a way that unreasonably interferes with the future interest holder's right to receive the property in substantially the same condition. The source identifies 3 types.
Okay.
First, permissive waste. This is essentially neglect, failing to maintain the property or make necessary repairs, allowing it to fall into disrepair.
Right.
Second, affirmative waste. This is active conduct that causes harm to the property, typically by reducing its value. Cutting down timber, unless it's a timber farm, removing minerals, or tearing down buildings without permission are classic examples. The life tenant must prevent diminished property value.
Makes sense.
And third, ameliorative waste. This is voluntary conduct that increases the property's value.
This one still seems counterintuitive. Making the property better is waste. How can that be?
Historically, yeah, the idea was that the future interest holder was entitled to receive the property in its original form. The modern view is more flexible, thankfully. The source notes that ameliorative waste is generally permitted if the change results in a reasonable use of the property, unless the future interest holders have a reasonable objection to the change itself, even if it increases value.
Okay.
So the analysis involves asking, are there multiple parties involved? Did the action change the property value? Will it substantially alter the nature of the future interest? For example, converting a beloved family home into a commercial parking lot might be ameliorative waste if the remaindermen expected to inherit the home, even if the parking lot is worth more.
So future interest holders can take legal action against a life tenant for waste.
Yes, they can seek an injunction to stop ongoing or threatened waste. If the future interest is vested, they can also sue for damages caused by the waste. This shows the life tenant isn't truly an absolute owner. Their rights are constrained by the rights of those who will take after them.
This perfectly segues into those future interest rights to property that don't become possessory until later, and the infamous rule against perpetuities, RAP.
Future interests are present ownership rights in property, but the right to possession is postponed. They are created at the same time as the present estate. As the source details, they are categorized based on who holds them, the original grantor or a third party.
We've already touched on the grantor's future interests when discussing defeasible fees and life estates that end without specifying a third party. Those are the possibility of reverter after FSD, right of reentry after FSSCS, and reversion, when the grantor conveys less than they started with, like a life estate, and doesn't specify who gets it next.
Correct. And a crucial point emphasized in the source is that these three future interests held by the grantor are not subject to the rule against perpetuities. They are always valid.
Okay, grantor's interests are safe from RAP. What about interests created in a third party?
The most common future interest created in a third party that follows a natural termination of a preceding estate, like a life estate or a term of years that ends naturally, is a remainder. The source uses the example to A for life, then to B. B has a remainder because B is a third party and will take possession upon the natural termination of A's life estate.
And remainders are further categorized as vested or contingent. What's the difference?
This is a key distinction. A remainder is vested if, at the time it is created, it is given to an ascertained person we know exactly who holds the remainder. It is not subject to a condition precedent. A condition precedent is something that must be met before the remainder holder is entitled to take possession upon the natural termination of the prior estate. In to A for life, then to B, B is ascertained, and there's no condition for B to meet other than waiting for A to die.
So a vested remainder holder is ready to take, they just have to wait for the preceding estate to end naturally.
Precisely. If the vested remainder man dies before the prior estate holder, their interest doesn't disappear. It passes to their heirs or devisees.
And a contingent remainder.
A remainder is contingent if it is either given to an unascertained person, we don't know who they are yet, or the group isn't finalized. Or R. It is subject to an express condition precedent that must be met before the remainder holder is entitled to take possession upon the natural termination of the prior estate. The source example, to A for life, then to A's children, creates a contingent remainder if A has no children yet, they're unascertained persons. An example of a condition precedent is to A for life, then to B if B survives A. B is ascertained, but surviving A is a condition that must be met before B's interest vests.
The source also talks about vested remainders subject to complete divestment and vested remainders subject to open. These sound like a mix.
They are. A vested remainder subject to complete divestment is given to an ascertained person and isn't subject to a condition precedent, but there is a condition subsequent that, if it occurs, could completely take the interest away. Example, to A for life, then to B, but if B ever smokes, then to C. B has a vested remainder, but it's subject to losing it entirely if B smokes. A vested remainder subject to open applies to class gifts, like to A for life, then to A's children. If A has one child, B, at the time of the grant, B is an ascertained person with no condition precedent for taking possession. So B has a vested remainder. However, A could have more children later. The class of children is open, meaning more members can join. As new children are born, they join the class and partially divest the shares of the existing members. The source emphasizes that for a class gift to be vested subject to open, at least one member of the class must be currently ascertained and have satisfied any conditions precedent. If no member currently qualifies, the entire class gift is a contingent remainder.
Okay, so remainders follow a life estate to a third party. They're vested, ascertained, no condition precedent, or contingent on ascertained or condition precedent. Vested ones can still be messed with by a condition subsequent, complete divestment, or by more people joining a class subject to open.
Exactly. And then we have the executory interests again. Remember, the defining trait is that they cut short or divest a prior estate, rather than waiting for it to end naturally. They can cut short an interest held by the grantor, that's ringing, or an interest held by another grantee, that's shifting.
So the key operational difference between a remainder and an executory interest is remainder waits patiently, executory interest jumps in early.
That's a great way to visualize it. Remainders always follow the natural termination of the preceding estate. Executory interest divest cut short a prior interest, whether it's the grantor's interest or another grantee's.
Now, about the rule against perpetuities, RAP. The source makes it clear this complex rule applies to certain future interests to prevent property from being tied up forever.
Right. RAP states that a future interest is void from the moment it's created, if there's any possibility, no matter how improbable, that it might vest or fail to vest more than 21 years after the death of the last life in being at the time the interest was created.
So you have to be absolutely 100% sure it will vest or fail within that specific time frame tied to people alive now plus 21 years.
Precision and certainty are key. If you can find any hypothetical scenario where the interest might vest too remotely, it's void from the start under common law RAP. The source lists which interests are subject to RAP contingent remainders, vested remainders subject to open, and executory interests. As mentioned, the grantor's interest reversion, possibility of reverter, right of reentry are exempt, as are interests transferred from one charity to another.
The source points out classic RAP traps, conditions based on events that might happen too far in the future, like to my grandchildren who reached age 25 if you have young children now.
Right.
The fertile octogenarian assumption.
Oh yes, the law presumes anyone can have children, regardless of age. It's a strange one.
Gifts conditioned on an unborn spouse surviving, and defeasible fees followed by executory interests that aren't guaranteed to vest in time. And the baddest to one, baddest to all rule for class gifts.
Those are the usual suspects. If just one potential member of a class gift could violate RAP, the entire gift to the class is void under common law. However, the rule of convenience can sometimes save a class gift. It closes the class to future members when at least one member becomes entitled to present possession, provided that happens within the perpetuity period.
This is complex stuff. Why spend so much time on it? Why is RAP important in the real world?
RAP is fundamental to promoting the marketability and free transfer of land. Without it, someone could create an interest today that wouldn't be resolved for centuries, making the property essentially impossible to sell or develop because no one would know who would ultimately own it. It forces clarity and finality in future interests, even if the test to get there is, well, complicated. Understanding these estates and future interests, even the tricky ones like RAP, is crucial because they define the very nature and limits of ownership, what rights you have now, and what rights others might have later.
Speaking of owning property with others, let's talk about concurrent estates, where multiple people own the same property at the same time.
Right. The source outlines the three primary ways individuals can co-own property: tenancy in common, joint tenancy, and tenancy by the entirety. The critical distinctions lie in how they're created and, most importantly, whether they include a right of survivorship.
Let's start with tenancy in common. The source says this is the most common and the default.
It is. Unless the grant explicitly states otherwise, a conveyance to two or more people creates a tenancy in common. Co-tenants in a tenancy in common have an equal right to possess and enjoy the entire property. However, their ownership shares are held separately and can be unequal.
And there is no right of survivorship.
This is the key difference. If a tenant in common dies, their interest does not automatically pass to the surviving co-tenants. Instead, their share passes to their heirs via intestate succession or to whoever is named in their will. It's freely alienable during life, divisible by will, and descendable by inheritance. If A and B own property as tenants in common and A dies, A's children become tenants in common with B as to A's original share.
Okay, tenancy in common, default. Equal right to possess the whole, potentially unequal shares, no survivorship. What about joint tenancy? This one does have the right of survivorship.
That's the defining feature. When a joint tenant dies, their interest is automatically extinguished and the surviving joint tenant shares are correspondingly increased until only one joint tenant remains, who then owns the property in fee simple absolute. This transfer happens automatically outside of probate, bypassing the will and inheritance. To create a joint tenancy at common law, the source stresses that four unities must be present at the time the interests are created, often remembered by the mnemonic PITT.
PIPT.
Yeah. Possession, all joint tenants must have an equal right to possess and enjoy the entire property. Interest, all joint tenants must have equal ownership shares, like 50-50 or 3-3-3-3-3. Time, all joint tenants must acquire their interests at the same time. And title, all joint tenants must acquire their interests by the same instrument, like the same deed or will.
So, if any of those four unities are broken after the joint tenancy is created, but while the joint tenants are still alive, the joint tenancy is severed.
Exactly. A lifetime transfer by one joint tenant, even selling just their share, breaks the unities of time and title regarding that share. The relationship between the transferring joint tenant or their buyer and the remaining original joint tenants is converted into a tenancy in common. The source notes this explicitly happens if one joint tenant mortgages their interest in a title theory state.
Ah, that connection again.
Right, because it's seen as transferring title, breaking the unity of title, but not in a lien theory state, where it's just a lien and doesn't break the unities.
Okay, so joint tenancy. Right of survivorship is key, traditionally needs PITT, and a lifetime transfer severs it as to that share, creating a tenancy in common with the new owner.
Right. It's alienable during life, but not divisible or descendable because the right of survivorship takes precedence at death.
And the third type, tenancy by the entirety.
This is a special form of concurrent ownership, available only to married couples in about half the states. It requires the four unities of joint tenancy plus the fifth unity of marriage. It also includes the right of survivorship. Its defining characteristic is that neither spouse can unilaterally convey, encumber, or cede partition of their interest without the consent of the other spouse.
So extra protection for the marital property. One spouse can't secretly sell or mortgage their half.
Correct. This form of ownership provides significant protection against creditors of only one spouse. The source notes that in states that recognize it, a conveyance to a married couple is often presumed to create a tenancy by the entirety, unless explicitly stated otherwise. It can only be terminated by divorce, mutual agreement, or the death of one spouse, leaving the survivor in fee simple.
What about the rights and responsibilities of co-tenants while they all own the property?
Regardless of the type of concurrent estate, except perhaps tenancy by the entirety regarding partition, each co-tenant has the right to possess and enjoy the entire property. The source emphasizes that one co-tenant typically does not owe rent to the others simply for occupying the property, even if they are the only one living there.
Unless there's an ouster.
Yes. Ouster is when one co-tenant wrongfully excludes another from possessing the property. An ousted co-tenant can sue for the fair rental value of the property for the time they were excluded, and can also seek a court order to regain access.
How about expenses and income from the property?
Co-tenants generally have the right to seek contribution from the others for necessary expenses paid in excess of their share, such as property taxes or mortgage payments. However, a co-tenant who makes repairs or improvements cannot usually force the others to contribute up front, but they can seek reimbursement for these costs in an accounting or partition action.
And partition is the legal process to divide the property.
Exactly. Any tenant in common or joint tenant, and sometimes entireties depending on state law, has the right to file a lawsuit to partition the property. The court prefers to order partition in kind, which is a physical division of the property into separate parcels according to each owner's share, if that's feasible and fair. If not, the court will order a partition by sale, where the property is sold and the proceeds are divided among the co-tenants according to their interests.
And income, like rent from a third-party tenant.
If the property is rented out, the co-tenant collecting the rent must account to the other co-tenants for their share of the income, although they can deduct necessary expenses, including repairs.
So understanding concurrent estates is absolutely essential if you plan to own property with anyone else, family or not, because it determines who owns what when someone dies, what happens if you want to sell, and how expenses and profits are shared.
It sets the rules for that shared ownership dynamic.
Let's move from ownership to occupancy through rental. The source dives deep into the world of landlord and tenant law.
This affects a massive number of people. The source provides a structured approach to analyzing these issues. establishing the relationship, identifying the type of tenancy, understanding transfers, detailing rights and duties, and covering termination and remedies.
First, the different types of tenancies. The source lists four main ones.
Yes. First, term of years. This is a tenancy for a fixed period, like 1 year, 5 years, or even just 6 months. The defining feature is it has a definite start and end date specified in the lease. It automatically terminates on the end date without either party needing to give notice. It can also end early if a party materially breaches a covenant in the lease.
Okay.
Second, periodic tenancy. This type runs for a specific period, say month to month or year to year, and